Does my spouse get my business when I die? My name is Andrew Ayers. I'm a business law and estate planning attorney with offices in Edina, Minnesota and New York City. And today we're going to talk about a pretty big misconception a lot of people have when they set up a business. They just assume that their spouse will get their business if they die. Now, this is one of those areas of law that intersects the two main parts of my practice. We have estate planning and we have business law all wrapped up into one place here. This is also one of the most dangerous places that you can try to figure this all out on your own and just do it online with some website. So if you've set up a business with some website, chances are they've done the filing fee for you with the state, and they probably marked it up, by the way, and charged you extras for doing the filing that they have to do when you could have done it yourself for cheaper. But then they've also given you some kind of an agreement. They've given you some kind of a document. Maybe it's only 5 or 6 pages long. Maybe you opted for the expensive one that was 30 or 40 pages long. But one of the most common provisions that's missing in any of these documents we see online is the succession planning documents. What happens when an owner of this business dies? And without any kind of succession plan, without any kind of provision in there, you've really just bought yourself a big headache. And it's actually not your headache. It's going to be your family's headache to sort this all out after you're done. And if you don't have an estate plan that goes with your LLC or with your corporate documents, then you may have left an even bigger problem, because not only does your family have to sort out what to do with your business, they're going to have to sort out what to do with your estate as well. So if we're in this situation and we're trying to figure out whether or not your spouse is going to be able to inherit your business, the first and the most important place anybody has to look is your corporate documents. So if you have an LLC, it's an operating agreement. If you have other kinds of companies, it's probably a shareholder or an owner's agreement. But whatever kind of agreement you have, there should be a provision in there that talks about the membership rights, the owner's rights, the shareholder's rights, and what happens when one of them dies. Is there some kind of succession plan? What happens to their interest? And if there isn't one in there, then you're leaving a big hole in this plan, and you're not leaving a carefully crafted legacy for your family, and your spouse may not actually be able to inherit it. You also want to have in these documents provisions that say what happens if one of your owners becomes incapacitated. If you have a 3-partner business and we have everyone working together and one of them becomes incapacitated, is there some kind of a plan for what we do? If there's going to be votes, do we have somebody who can step in and vote for that 1/3 owner's interest on major decisions? These are all different provisions you can find in agreements, but oftentimes are absent if you've just bought an off-the-shelf agreement, either from your local office store or from some online website. Sure, they've mail merged in your information at the beginning. They've probably put in a couple things here and there. Maybe they told you should do an S-corp election, but these are the provisions that it's important to work with a professional and make sure you have in your agreements. Because frankly, your spouse doesn't automatically inherit your LLC or your business ownership if you die. There's going to be a lot of other things we look at, that corporate agreement, your estate plan documents, but it's not automatic that your spouse will be able to inherit your ownership. The first thing we have to look at, assuming they've got the right to inherit, is can they actually do it? So if you own a licensed business, for example, I run a law firm, I have a law license. However, in the states where I practice law, non-lawyers are not allowed to own a law firm. They can't own that business. So if something were to happen to me tomorrow, my wife cannot step in and just run my business. She can't be the owner of my business because it's not allowed. She's not a lawyer. You can have lots of other professionals, especially doctors and engineers, who have very specific requirements as to who is allowed to own an interest in those businesses. And you need to make sure that if your spouse does not have an interest in that business, that we find a way to make sure they're compensated if something happens to you. Again, this is a provision that should be in your agreement, but if you bought it off some website, you may not even have it in there. One thing you may want to consider is something called key person insurance. So key person insurance is for exactly this situation where we have a few different owners, and let's say one of the owners dies and we can't allow their interest to just be given to their spouse. The insurance policy is taken out on the life of each owner, and if that owner dies, their interest in the business is essentially purchased with that life insurance policy, and their family receives the proceeds, and the business gets their shares back. Now, you may not have encountered this before, but if you've got partners in the business, this may be something you want to consider. These insurance proceeds are a great way to make sure you're protecting the business, because otherwise the business may have to find millions of dollars to somehow pay out an owner's share, and you may not have that kind of cash on hand. And of course, the other consideration we have to have is when we veer over into the area of family law. What if we have a business of 3 friends and all of them are married, but now one of them goes through a divorce? Does that provision say what happens to that member's interest? Because trust me, I started out my career as a family law attorney. Those 3 friends don't want to now have their one friend's ex-spouse sitting at the table with an interest in the company and having a decision in the future of the company. Because if it was a divorce that was not amicable, if there was a lot of fighting, if there's a lot of animosity, that ownership meeting is going to be uncomfortable. And there's going to be no easy way around it, except maybe you buy out that spouse's interest. However, what I've seen in the past is if that ex-spouse really, really hates you all, they'll just refuse to sell. They'll hold on to the interest because they know that every year at the annual meeting or every time there's a big decision, they get to make your life miserable, all because they used to be married to your friend. So as you can see, there can be a lot of different issues that come up regarding your interest in your business and whether it gets transferred to your spouse when you die, or in the case of a divorce, whether it gets transferred to your soon-to-be ex-spouse. So the important way to look at this is there's two ways to try to do it. The first way is you could try to do it yourself. You can buy that agreement from that website, whether it's 5 pages, whether it's 50 pages, but are you sure you've got the right provisions? We have a lot of discussions around my office of, if I bought that agreement online, is it okay? It might be. Did you sign it in the end? Did you modify the right provisions? But the smarter way to do it, way number 2, is work with professionals. Work with your financial advisors at your business. Work with an attorney. Work with a business law attorney who can go through your corporate documents. This isn't something you want to let go and just figure out it'll all work out down the road. If you don't have these provisions in your corporate agreements, if you don't have an estate plan, then there's a good chance that your spouse will not actually inherit your business if something happens to you. So if you're ready to talk to a professional, if you're ready to get started, you can go to my website, andrewmayers.com. There's a red Schedule a Strategy Session button on the main page. You'll be taken to my personal calendar where we can have a 15 or 20 minute phone call about you and your business. And make sure that if you want your spouse to inherit your business, we know what the next steps are and what provisions you need. This is not something you want to leave to chance or to some agreement that you found online that you think looks great, but is missing the most important provisions for you and your family.